Hello, everyone. I'm Rich Pierce, and I'm sitting with Kenneth Morgan now. He is running for the United States House of Representatives, the 6th District, trying to be the Republican nominee over incumbent Bill Johnson. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Bill Johnson's name, obviously easily recognizable for people around here. He's been in that position for some time now. What do you want folks to know about Kenneth Morgan when they head to that ballot box?
I'd like the voters to know that, like Bill Johnson, I'm also a military veteran. I served in the Navy for 6 years. I deployed to Afghanistan. I was in an IED blast while I was there, and then came home. I'm disabled now, and the VA is paying for my college. I'm an active student over at Marshall University as well. And I'm just campaigning now, trying to become our district's representative to the United States House of Representatives.
What do you think you can glean from your military service that can help you in the U.S. House?
I think a lot of the honor that they really push in the military, and like the commitment to the job, making sure that you get things done whenever you put yourself to the task to accomplish something.
You're young. You're 31 years old. You're a student. People might look at you and say, he's too young. Does he really know what he's doing? Can we really trust him in such a lofty position when the other guy has been doing it for some time? What would you say to folks who might say you're a little too green for this?
Well, I was also a corpsman when I was in the military. My job was to save lives while I was in Afghanistan, and I unfortunately did have to do my job. I had one Marine whose injuries were too severe, and even surgeons couldn't save his life, but I did save another Marine's legs. He's able to walk again, and they credit that to me. And that's a very big responsibility that you have to carry whenever you're in a combat zone and you've just been in an IED blast and you're trying to figure out what's going on around you while you're also taking care of injured people who are very close to you.
Now, you bill yourself as a young conservative, somebody who's a little bit different than the run-of-the-mill Republican that we find in the United States Congress right now and in the Senate. How do you differentiate yourself?
Well, I'd say it's more on social issues, I'd say, is where the big difference between the millennial conservatives and then the old school conservatives are, with being more open to gay marriage, for instance. I don't care whether you're gay, straight, or whatever. It doesn't affect my life at all. So why should I say that just because I don't personally agree with your lifestyle that you can't go through and get married just like I would and be happy just like I would be if I were to go through that exact same life experience?
What are some other social issues that you might find yourself on a different platform?
On a different platform with women's rights and being more open to at least being respectful of the trans community as well, and being open to actually, so long as they're respectful to me, referring to them by their preferred pronouns whenever they ask politely. And I'd be polite and I'd refer to them by whatever pronoun they ask me to. And then with the women's rights and making sure that we get more women in STEM fields and really pushing more towards gender equality in workplaces.
What about abortion? What's your stance on abortion rights?
I am pro-life. So I have the conservative religious view on it in my personal life, but politically I actually go more towards the scientific side of things with the opinion of human embryologists, when they say that human life begins at conception. And then, of course, there's also the DNA of the embryo. Is human DNA completely different from the mother's DNA, and the cells of an embryo are performing a completely different function from what the cells of the mother is doing. I'd say that's another difference between me and a lot of the conservatives, is how we actually look at the pro-life side of the argument.
Let's talk about an issue that's near and dear to many people around here, the potential cracker plant in Belmont County. It hasn't been announced yet. A lot of lawmakers at the state and federal level, including Bill Johnson, have been working to get that through. What are your thoughts on the cracker plant? Is it a good idea?
It can bring in jobs, so that is a good thing considering the unemployment rate in all the counties within this district being higher than what the unemployment rate is nationally. We're still behind everybody else in the country. But environmentally, we also have to consider the environmental impact that it could have and the potential for pollution in the river, which is just as close here as this where I live down in Chesapeake. And I've also had experience, like my personal life with people I know very closely getting sick because of companies dumping. And I'm not going to say any names because there's something going on right now. But I think that you should really look at the environment as well and look at the regulations that are in place, the federal regulations, the state regulations, local regulations as well.
Is the federal government doing enough right now to regulate controls on companies when it comes to their effect on the environment?
I don't really think so. In some ways, they are overregulated, and companies are charged too much because of a lot of the overregulation. But at the same time, there's other regulations that could be put in place to make sure that, it doesn't really hurt a company, in my opinion, to say that you can't just dump chemicals in the Ohio River or the Mississippi River or in any body of water that we potentially get our drinking water from. But at the same time, you can't say that you can't have too much carbon emissions and at the same time make them produce so much energy for everybody to utilize, because there's got to be a balance as well.
What's your number one priority if you make it to Congress?
Term limits.
Talk about term limits a little bit.
Well, I've been studying term limits a little bit, especially with my studies in political science and the issues that would be faced with term limits of having them too short, with your legislature then being incompetent, not knowing how to do their job because they're not there long enough to learn the job. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we don't have the career politicians who are in there for 30 years and become corrupt, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I cannot remember who said that quote, so it's not me, I know that. But we want to make sure that the politicians who are they are in long enough to learn how to do their job and actually get what they went in there to accomplish and accomplish that goal.
Let's talk about gun control. There's a push by many to start regulating more the types of firearms that people can own. And of course, there's pushback on the other side that there should be no limits whatsoever. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment and the gun control issue?
I am 100% on the side of the Second Amendment. I believe that Americans have a right to own firearms. There are logical arguments that you can make to make sure that people with certain mental health conditions can't have firearms because they'd be a danger to themselves or to others. But you also want to make sure that the people who have all their eggs in the basket are able to get their firearms, and the people who know how to handle their firearms, know how to safely store them whenever they have kids in the house, and know what they're doing whenever they have their AR-15 or their AK-47 or whatever other firearm it is that they choose to have, Mosin Nagant. It doesn't matter what it is. If they are a law-abiding citizen and they have no mental health problems that would disqualify them, anything that would make them a danger to themselves or others, then they should be able to have access to whatever firearm they feel like they want to have.
Mandatory background checks, part of that?
I would say mandatory background checks to make sure that people who are, criminals, we don't want criminals who have committed violent crimes or sexual offenses against women or minors to have firearms either.
Gun show loopholes, anything like that? Would you limit any of the ways that folks can purchase?
I'd be more in favor of making sure that gun shows have mandatory background checks performed there on site, just to make sure that people can still go to the gun shows and enjoy themselves and look at all the different guns that they want. But if they want to purchase something, there needs to be a way for them to have a background check done there as well.
Let's talk about healthcare. We talked about the environmental impact. Obviously, the environment has an impact on people's health. What's your stance right now on healthcare? How to fix the system? Is the system fine as it is?
The system's not fine the way it is. It does need to be fixed. A lot of people did gain health care from the Affordable Care Act whenever the expansion of Medicaid took place. But at the same time, there are a lot of hardworking Americans who saw their premiums go up exponentially, like 100% or more. And now they can't afford their health care bills anymore, and it's like for some reason, people who worked hard and saved up their money and are now getting ready to retire feel like they're being punished just because they wanted to help some people who deserve to be helped, but they decided to increase the healthcare costs of people who already had their health care. It doesn't make sense.
So what's a good way to hit that middle ground?
I don't really know how President Trump has proposed to do it. I haven't heard anything about it, but opening up the health care across state lines. And doing that, I understand it could really boost competition between health insurance providers. But at the same time, each state has their own regulations on health care and what they can and cannot offer. So I'm not sure maybe if a federal minimum standard of care that states could opt into, that way they'd have some way of setting up a like base level coverage that anybody in whatever state that opted into it could have. But that would be something that would be designed by the companies themselves, not by the federal government, not by the state governments. It's just the minimum standard, and then companies can be like, okay, we're going to go with this, and then if it meets the requirements of it, then it's fine.
Speaking of President Trump, this is an area that voted heavily in favor of President Trump in 2016. What are your general views, and are his policies ones that you can get behind? Would you be a rubber stamp for the president?
I am definitely behind the president. Nobody agrees with anybody 100% of the time, but I agree with about 98% of what President Trump's done, especially like recently with the peace agreement between the United States and the Taliban, getting our troops out of Afghanistan finally after, 19 years? Since 2000, well, I think we got in there in 2002, but it's like since 2001, whenever we were actually attacked by Al-Qaeda, and now, of course, Al-Qaeda's basically gone. They don't exist anymore. Osama bin Laden's gone. He's been killed. That's why we were there. And President Trump and his administration got the peace agreement signed. In 14 months, hopefully, if everything works out, we won't be there anymore.
It's possible that if you win and you take office, you may be entering alongside a Democrat. You might be, it could be Joe Biden, could be Bernie Sanders. As we sit here today, those look like the two most viable candidates for the Democrats. Are you going to be able to reach across party lines and work with a president of the opposite party?
It is important that we are able to negotiate with each other, Democrats and Republicans, because in the end, we're all still Americans. We might have disagreements on certain policy issues, but we shouldn't let those disagreements really separate us and make us go at each other all the time, yelling and screaming. This country has always been built on our ability to compromise with each other. And compromise in our system is very important because that's just how we do things. And right now, that's not happening on either side. And it's time that that stops and we actually have some civility in our politics again.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Kenneth Morgan, thank you so much for being here today. You can look for this, of course, on our website. We have a one-on-one airing. That'll be on the website as well, alongside Congressman Bill Johnson's. Kenneth, good luck on Election Day.
Thank you.